La quatrième écrivaine que nous allons écouter ce soir est Louise Doughty. Née en 1963 en Angleterre et résidant à Londres, Louise Doughty est romancière, critique littéraire et dramaturge. Elle a travaillé également comme chroniqueuse au Daily Telegraph et pour la BBC Radio 4. Louise a publié 9 romans. Le dernier en date, publié en 2019, s'intitule Platform 7. Whatever You Love, son 6e roman publié en 2010, est son premier roman à être traduit en français sous le titre « Je trouverai ce que tu aimes » et publié aux éditions Point. Ce livre a figuré dans les sélections du Costa Book Award, de l'Orange Prize et du London Book Award. En 2013, son 7e roman, intitulé Apple Tree Yard, est devenu un best-seller se vendant à plus d'un demi-million d'exemplaires rien qu'au Royaume-Uni. Elle a également été traduite dans 30 pays à travers le monde. Une adaptation télévisée a été réalisée avec l'actrice Emily Watson et a été diffusée sur BBC One en janvier 2017. Louise Doughty a remporté plusieurs prix pour ses pièces radiophoniques et ses nouvelles. Elle a publié une œuvre de non-fiction, A Novel in a Year, un livre d'apprentissage de l'écriture basé sur une de ses chroniques très populaires. Louise Doughty est membre de la Royal Society of Literature.
I will do my reading in English, and I always feel as a British person I should apologise for only being able to speak one language. But at the moment I feel there's a great deal else that British people have to apologise for. I hope you will take that as read. I'd like to echo Stuart's thanks to the Foundation. It's my first time here. It's been absolutely inspirational, and thanks in particular to the wonderful Sophie. I've noticed if we stand together we're almost a chessboard, Sophie, so if the others get bored later maybe we could give that a try. Apologise as well for the occasional cough or sniff. I have hay fever. I don't know what hay fever is in French, but it's nothing more sinister than that. So I'm going to read one section from Platform 7. As Sophie said, it's my 9th novel. And just to introduce the novel a little bit, I grew up in a small town of the UK called the East Midlands. I don't know if any of you know it. It's very flat and it's very dull. And after growing up in this small town, I went to university in the north of England. And when I went to visit my parents, I had to change trains at Peterborough railway station, which is in the centre of the country. It's a big transitive hub. For the Swiss people in the audience, forget your wonderful, efficient, on-time railway system. Think of a British railway system. After my first degree, I went and I did a postgrad at Norwich, and when I went home, I had to change trains at Peterborough railway station again. I then moved to London for the next 30 years of life, and when I visited my parents, I had to, wait for it, change trains at Peterborough railway station. In those days, there were 2 things you could guarantee. It was that the waiting room would be locked and the ladies' toilet would also be locked. The branch trains to my parents' house were once an hour, so if you were unlucky, you could end up with a 2-hour wait. And I always used to say that if I'd been bad in life and died and went to purgatory, I would find myself trapped on Peterborough railway station on a freezing cold winter's night, with the wind blowing in from the fens. So, Platform 7 is, as Sophie said, it's a ghost story, and it's Peterborough railway station as a metaphor for purgatory. Most of it is set on the station, and it's narrated entirely by the ghost of a young woman who has died on the station in mysterious circumstances, and she's trapped there until the mystery of her death is solved. As the novel opens, she's floating around the station, and she's pure consciousness. She doesn't have any, she's not floating around in a white dress. It seems to me that if ghosts do exist, then they wouldn't just be haunting country houses, would they? They would be haunting things like railway stations and shopping centres and multi-storey car parks. So Lisa is her name. She's trapped on the station, she's floating around, and she has no memory of what has happened to her. So for the first third of the book, it's in 3 parts, you get to know the staff of the station, Dalmar, a security guard from Somalia, the British Transport Police officers who've investigated her death and concluded wrongly that it was probably a suicide. And gradually her memories return, and she realises that her death was unexplained and violent and connected with her past. Then at the end of the first third of the book, something happens that awakes her memory. And for the middle third of the book, we go back into Lisa's past. And we find out about her relationship with a man who's a doctor at the local hospital called Matthew. And they've met and they've had what in English we call a whirlwind romance. I don't know what the French equivalent would be, but he's bombarded her with love. They've moved into a flat together very, very quickly. And once they've moved in together, the relationship starts to go wrong and moves into an area that we now call coercive control. And it's about a toxic relationship, it's about a possessive man and a manipulative man. And gradually the relationship becomes darker and darker, and we realise that this is what is going to lead to Lisa's death. We don't know quite how. The section I'm going to read is from the end of that middle section, the flashback section. After that, we will come back to the present day. She's back on Peterborough railway station as a ghost, but now with full knowledge of what has happened to her. And the rest of the novel is about what happened next to her and to Matty, who's still very much alive. But we won't go into that, no spoilers. It's probably worth saying that for a novel that's narrated by a dead person, it is in fact about love. And it's about the different forms of love that we all have in our lives. And the way in which, particularly young women, a lot of us are still encouraged to think of romantic love as the be-all and end-all. Whereas in fact we have love for our family, love for our children, love for our parents, love for our friends, our work colleagues, and how our whole lives are made up of these different and interweaving loves, and the importance of that. But before Lisa gets to that point, at the end of the middle third of the book, the relationship has got extremely dark. She's already run out of the house in the middle of the night in her nightie. She's been brought back by the police. Things are getting very bad indeed. And she wakes up in the middle of the night and she finds that Matty is not in bed beside her. And she has this strange thought, maybe the whole relationship is an illusion, maybe he doesn't even exist. And then she gets up and she goes out to the sitting room and she finds him sitting on the floor, and they've got some double doors with a small balcony overlooking the little back garden in the block of flats where they live. And Matty is sitting on the floor, cross-legged, with his back to her. And he's silent and he doesn't turn around when she approaches. I walked closer to him, my bare feet soundless on the carpet. I stood behind him, no more than a metre away, and looked down. I noticed for the first time that there were the faintest signs of his hair thinning at the crown. It was as if his much older self was layered over his present self in that moment, in that pose. Still motionless, he seemed at once an old man and a young boy sitting on the floor, thinking and waiting for something. In the Matthew of now, I could see Matthew as a child and Matthew as an elderly person, the whole of him encapsulated in that one translatable pose. I took another step towards him. Still, he did not turn, although I was close enough for him to hear my breathing now. What is it about us? Women, I mean, that we are so tender when men drop their guard just for a moment and let their capacity for weakness show. Is it some deeply imprinted desire to mother, or is it simply that it feels like such a relief to get a glimpse of their susceptibility and to know that in the moment the tables are turned? Looking down at Matthew and seeing the young him and the old him together at once, I was filled with the desire to kneel down behind him and take him in my arms, to wrap my arms around his chest from behind and rest the side of my head against the side of his, and rock him, comfort him. Perhaps he would cry a little then and turn to me. Perhaps it was all going to be okay. This might have happened, but before it could happen, he spoke. He stayed motionless, but his voice was clear in the darkness. It was plain and cold. I'm not good for you. There was something about the simplicity with which he spoke. No games, no provocations, just a simple fact. The truth of it made me feel gripped by fear, a sensation as real and as physical as if someone was squeezing my heart in their fist. I did not know what to say. If I agreed with him, it meant the end of our relationship there and then. Yet any contradiction of what he said would be a lie, and we both knew it. As I stood there, trapped in that moment, I could not even explain my own fear to myself, the heat that rose to my face, for it was more than fear, of course, it was foresight. I knew that whatever happened between Matthew Goodison and me from now on, it was going to end, and end badly. There was no way out of this that would not entail unpleasantness. It was just a question of what form it would take and how bad it would be. I stood there for a long time. He sat in silence, his back to me, looking out over the garden. Outside, there was nothing, no sound and no movement, only darkness. The plain square of grass, the empty benches, the austere and unforgiving night.